Happy Wednesday, friends. I'm Michael Kovnat, and this is the Next Big Idea Daily, quick masterclasses from the best new books written and read by the authors themselves. Don't forget to sign up for our free newsletter using the link in the episode notes. Now, today, let's talk about a mystery that's sitting right there in your wallet. I'm talking about money. What is money? Is it a piece of paper, a number in your bank account, an idea we've all agreed to believe in, like Tinkerbell? Journalist Paul Vigna has spent years covering crypto and asking hard questions about finance. He's written a new book called The Almightier: How Money Became God, Greed Became Virtue, and Debt Became Sin. In the book, he argues that money is less of a tool and almost more of a religious object, a myth fueled by faith, weaponized by greed, and now so central to our lives that we barely question it. Here's Paul to share his big ideas.
Hi, I'm Paul Vigna, author of The Almightier. I was a reporter at the Wall Street Journal and Dow Jones Newswires for 25 years, and my minor claim to fame is that I was one of the first mainstream journalists to take Bitcoin seriously. I started covering it in 2013 when Bitcoin was trading under $100, if you can believe that, and the industry was tiny. With my colleague Michael Casey, we wrote The Age of Cryptocurrency, the first mainstream book about Bitcoin, and later The Truth Machine. Part of what attracted me to Bitcoin was just the sheer zaniness of it all, the crazy people trying to build out this idea of money without borders or governments. It was really kind of unhinged and wild. But a more fundamental thing was that Bitcoin forced me to ask myself a question I had never asked myself before. I had never even really thought of before. What is money? Simple answer was money is an accounting system. It's a way for societies to keep track of who owns what and who owes who. But that doesn't explain why money is so important. Nobody works 3 jobs or rigs Ponzi schemes or holds people up at gunpoint or starts wars over spreadsheets. It wasn't money's utility that made it so valuable. What was it about money that made it so important? I spent years thinking about that question, and answering it ended up leading me to The Almightier. Money isn't real. Your father probably told you money doesn't grow on trees, and that is true. It also doesn't grow in fields, doesn't grow on farms. Money doesn't grow at all. That's because money isn't real, at least in the sense of having an objective existence. Money isn't a thing, it's an idea. It's an idea that people made up and it solved a problem for them. In ancient societies, what constituted wealth were physical things, land, crops, animals, that kind of thing. Money emerged as a uniform way to measure these things and make them exchangeable, and it therefore allowed a society to keep track of their possessions and grow. But there was no physical thing that was money. Lots of things could be represented by money, I'm using air quotes, you can't see it, but I'm using air quotes. And lots of things can represent money. Wheat, corn, gold, silver, coins, paper bills, digital entries in an online ledger, even cigarettes in certain closed economic systems, and I hope you are never sent to one of those closed economic systems. But none of them are money. Aristotle explained that money's existence came from the law. It was essentially just an agreed-upon methodology. Much more recently, the philosopher John Searle argued that money exists because of again I'm using air quotes, this is his exact quote, collective intentionality, quote unquote, which occurs when a group of people agree on a set of beliefs about something. In other words, money has value because, and only because, we believe it has value. Monetary systems don't work because of the intrinsic value of gold or dollar bills or bitcoins. They work because of our faith in them. And imbuing money with faith has resulted in a world where money is the bedrock of our entire society, the thing around which everything else is built. Money is a product of religion. Having a money system was initially important in the ancient world primarily to one group specifically, temple officials. When money first shows up more than 5,000 years ago, it is a record-keeping system employed by temple scribes in the Mesopotamian city of Uruk. Uruk was the New York of its day, the biggest, most powerful city in the world, and its massive temple was the biggest building in the city, visible for miles outside the city walls. Now, today, temples, churches, synagogues, mosques, these are just places of worship. But it was different in the ancient world. The temple wasn't just a place of worship. These ancient cities, figuratively and literally, revolved around the temple. There was no separation of church and state. The church was the state. The entire purpose of the city was to create a suitable home here on earth, which was the temple, for the gods that people assumed existed. The entire economic life of the city was aimed at this goal, and the temple managed it all. Everything important went through the temple. Taxes were paid to the temple. Crops and seeds for the next planting season were paid out by the temple. And the way it tracked all of this stuff was to employ a system of measurement that would become what we today call money. Money, you see, has been lashed to religion from its very start. And eventually, money would carry with it an implicit understanding. The people who had it were blessed by the gods. People who had money had it because the gods wanted them to have it. Debt relief was common. Once. Not long after money was invented, something even more powerful was invented. The loan. People realized that the monetary system could be leveraged to allow for loans. Then they discovered an even more powerful thing, compound interest. Money could give birth to more money. This practice spread across the ancient world, and private creditors became fantastically wealthy, while common people became more indebted and more impoverished. It created a severely unbalanced society. Because money carried with it the implicit approval of the gods, this system was allowed to grow. Who could deny what the gods ordained? Well, somebody had to step in. Eventually, a relief valve was created. Around 2400 BCE, a king named Enmetenna issued an edict after he had conquered a neighboring city. He erased all debts. People who'd lost their farms over debts had their farms restored. People sold into bondage were released. This debt relief edict came to be called an amarghe, and it was a way to restore balance and allow a society to get back to the important business of making things to satisfy the gods. With the amarghe, the kings could wipe the proverbial slate clean. But these amarghe were bitterly contested by the creditors. And over a period of millennia, you have this back and forth between the officials and the creditors. In Sparta, for just one example, a young king named Agis issued such an edict, going so far as to publicly take all the debt records out into the square and burn them. He was wildly popular with the people, as you can imagine, but he was wildly hated by the city's wealthy families, of which his family was one. He was soon betrayed and executed. And they even hung his mother and his grandmother just to send a message. Eventually, after all of this, the creditors proved too powerful. Debts and loans and usury, for that matter, became codified, and the amarghes disappeared from the economic toolkit as a way to combat the problem of persistent, overwhelming debt. Capitalism didn't create greed. Greed created capitalism. I'm sure you all know the famous greed is good speech from the movie Wall Street. And while the line in that movie is delivered by the bad guy, that credo is actually the cornerstone of capitalism. In the 1400s, a Florentine writer named Poggio Bracciolini wrote a dialogue called On Avarice. The dialogue weighs the many cons, but also some of the pros of avarice, of greed. Most of the dialogue's characters are completely anti-greed, anti-avarice. They rail on it. They besiege it. They see it as the way it was commonly seen back then, the root of all evil. But one of them makes a radical counterargument. Greed is necessary. Greed is a part of us. It is something that you can't just, get rid of it. Not only can you not get rid of it, but greed is what drives men to create, to make things, to build up enough wealth to support a city like Florence. Every society, he says, needs these greedy, wealthy people who will bring in money and use it to support the city. Avarice sometimes is beneficial. That's his exact quote. Does that sound familiar at all? Now, Bracciolini ran with an extremely influential group of Florentines that included Cosimo de' Medici and the future Pope Nicholas V. The ethos of beneficial greed that Bracciolini outlined was adopted by these men and other influential merchants and people around Florence and some of these other Italian city-states. Nicholas employed it to rebuild the church after decades of schisms that had weakened its powers. Using this concept of making lots of money and spending it very, very liberally, Nicholas and his successors raised the church to new heights of power and decadence. Medici employed it through his bank, becoming both the most powerful man in Europe, a king in all but name, and a benefactor of artists, architects, laborers, contracts, and clergies. He was wildly popular. And another thing, and this is very, very important, Medici wasn't a noble. He wasn't a royal. He was a commoner. And his example inspired other commoners to see that they too could embrace greed and pursue wealth for themselves. This idea upends a millennium of thinking in Europe, and it changes Europe for good. And this idea that capital is a tool that can be pursued and employed by anybody is, in my opinion, the real start of what would come to be called capitalism. Our problems can all be traced to this misunderstanding about money. Over the last 600 years, the idea that money is a sign of God's favor and greed is good have fused and grown. Protestant John Calvin argued that people had money because God wanted them to have money. The economist Adam Smith secularized this idea with his metaphor of the invisible hand, arguing that people working for their own selfish ends were actually doing the bidding of divine providence. And as organized religion receded from the center of public life, what replaced it was this new religion of money. 6,000 years ago, religion was the literal center of society, like I had said. People's entire lives revolved around trying to please the gods. Today, money is at the center of our world. Our lives revolve around making money. You can't live without money, at least not long or not well. We have made money, something created as a way to track goods, our godhead, and this misunderstanding about what money is behind, I think, all of the world's problems. We could, today, as a global society, grow enough food for everybody. We do, in fact, grow enough food for everybody. We could build enough housing. We could provide enough education and healthcare. We could generate enough electricity with just renewables, to say nothing of fossil fuels. None of that is hyperbole. It is simple fact. And that has been our reality for at least a century. We do not live in a world of scarcity anymore. The reason that we don't even try to do those things, though, is because we have centered our world around the pursuit of an unreal thing that we made up, rather than around taking care of each other. And every attempt at making our world better, at reducing our crushing debt loads, at lifting up the less fortunate, will fail until we come to see money for what it is and isn't. And look, money hasn't been all bad. I'm not here to just rail on money. And greed, for all of its problems, is just a part of us. We have made incredible strides as a species since we started using money and since we embraced greed. But if we could do all the things we've done based off one of our worst impulses, imagine what we could do if we started from a somewhat higher base.
Thank you, Paul. All right, everyone, you can get a copy of The Almightier using the link in the episode notes. That's our show for the day. Remember, go to nextbigideaclub.com to find out about our hardback subscription club. That's where we send you the best new nonfiction books as chosen by our curators Malcolm Gladwell, Adam Grant, Susan Cain, and Daniel Pink. Check that out at nextbigideaclub.com and use the code DAILY for a 20% discount. I'm Michael Kovnat. See you tomorrow.